Everybody, welcome back into Bayou Time. Harry McCullough here. We're speaking with Jerome Zeringue, of course, is the House of Representatives, District 52, man. Glad to see you here. You know, you guys are not in session, but you're still doing a lot of work right now. One of the big things that's going on, obviously, is we're 100 and probably 10 days out from a hurricane, still dealing with state government, trying to deal with federal governments, trying to deal with local governments, trying to coordinate a lot of different stuff. How's the aftermath of the storm and what's going on?
Well, the unfortunate reality is it's still, it feels like yesterday in some respects, and others have been dragging on forever. And we're working on trying to work with GOSEP and the state and the federal government to try to expedite as much as we can. There's still people, unfortunately, in situations where they're either in tents or the trailers still aren't coming, or they're here, but just getting the process of getting them set up has been somewhat delayed. But, you know, the state program has been working well. It's just the FEMA program has been somewhat sluggish in terms of its response.
Yeah, well, it's the first time they've ever had a storm. No, I'm just joking. It seemed like we could have figured some things out, and I think they always go back to Katrina, it seems like, which was in '05. But it seems like, you know, even more recently, we had Laura. Before that, we had Harvey in Texas. Before that, we had the floods in Denham Springs. So we've had all of these back-to-back issues. It seems like they should kind of have some kind of things in place to know what they're dealing with.
You would think, and for the most part, you look at after these events, you talk about after action plans or lessons learned, and you'd think that they'd actually apply some of these lessons learned. I mean, it was 9 months in Lake Charles and other areas where they actually started receiving trailers, and they look to that and point to us and say, well, at least it's not taking 9 months. Well, it shouldn't take 3 or 4 months. You know, if you're going to get hit by a storm, we know when the storm was coming that we were going to experience significant impacts, and that the process of securing and getting these temporary homes or trailers in place to where at least it wouldn't be such a problem in terms of getting these things set up to try to provide some relief. Right. For homes. In Lake Charles, there's people still with blue tarps.
I know.
And that's part of the problem, too, is so they're still rebuilding. A lot of the contractors and stuff that we could benefit from are still over there trying. And there are people fighting the insurance, right, which ultimately that's a whole other issue, too. And we can talk about that. That's going to be a problem now that you're getting into the rebuilding phase or just getting your life somewhat back to normal. You're going to have to fight insurance and some of the other issues that we're going to have to contend with.
Sure. And, you know, I'm fortunate those folks up in Kentucky and Arkansas that just had that tornado. The first thing I was thinking of, I bet you a lot of these contractors are going up there. I wasn't the first thing, obviously. I was obviously concerned for those folks and loss of life up there. But then there's another rebuilding project that are going to take manpower and goods away from where we're trying to do here. So it's real interesting the way. And in so many ways, you see so much money come in, like billions of dollars come in. But then in other ways, it seems like they're tossing them around like they're manhole covers, right? Like nickels, as opposed to like, oh, wait, here, if it's garbage pickup, seems like those guys, and did a wonderful job. But I know that wasn't cheap. You know?
No, it's not cheap. There's significant contracts that were being executed to get that work done.
So in some ways, they're like, just here, take it and get things done, and which is wonderful. In other ways, you go, hey, can we get a little trailer here? And like, well, we got to worry about if they have insurance and stuff. So it seems like there's a lot of different things on both sides of the fence.
Oh yeah, and you would think, especially you indicated this isn't their first rodeo. Right. They had problems initially in trying to get people to elevate their trailers, which is ridiculous. I mean, you're worrying about it would cost more to elevate the trailer than it would be to replace the trailer. You'd be better off to just set up the trailer. If another storm comes, unfortunately, hoping that would be the case, not move it away. If it has to be washed away, it's still cheaper to come out and put a whole nother trailer in and you elevate the first one, which probably wouldn't have worked anyway. Right. So it's how FEMA addresses things. I know they have their check boxes and requirements, and I understand that. But it seems like after we've been through these events for so many times and we've experienced these things, it's not rocket science.
Right.
We have to restore power. We have to get people back to where their communities can function with stores and gasoline stations and things just a normal everyday life. It's going to be a long time as it is. Just like I mentioned in Lake Charles, they're still recovering. But you get the basic necessities of life, and you get people a place where they can, at least come home to for a while until everything gets somewhat back to normal.
Well, the other thing in the middle of all this, when you talk about FEMA, is the flood insurance, and they keep kind of jumping back and forth with that, kind of pushing that ball down the road a little bit too. So what's the latest with that?
Well, they're not pushing the ball back.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
now,
they've already experienced the increase. Yeah.
Yeah,
Flood 2, 2.0 is going to come into effect in April, and there is going to be a significant impact in terms of the cost associated with flood insurance. For some people, it's going to be one of two things: whether they just they can't afford it, or they're just going to self-insure. In some respects, it's going to be more expensive to pay flood insurance than a mortgage. Even if they wanted to take a loan out to rebuild their home, it would be more expensive. Their flood insurance would be more expensive than the mortgage on the loan that they would take out to try to rebuild. And unfortunately, it's going to, especially in the lower portion of the parish, it's going to have a significant impact.
Yeah, no, I know. And look, that's people's homes, that's investments they've made over a long time. That plays into home equity,
property value,
property value, right?
Yeah.
That comes into all of those things, and that'll be interesting to see exactly how far we go. So, what can be done? 2.0 is here now. Right?
Yes, and I think we're working with our congressional delegation to either somewhat delay it or at least minimize the increase, because they can go up to anywhere from 9 to 18% increase based upon 2.0, and that's depending upon how much that is.
They can do that every year,
significant.
18%.
Yes, until they get the actuarial rate. So it's
over 10 years. That 18% keeps going. You're about to head to Baton Rouge, and you're working on a budget that you have to get before the session starts.
Yeah,
right?
Working on the budget. And again, we were just talking in the break how we always come up here and we're complaining about things, but at least there's some good news in regard to the
got
budget.
some money, huh?
Yeah. So this session, it appears we're going to be working with a surplus, and that can be attributed to several things. Primarily, the corporate tax was higher than expected. Some of the numbers that were anticipated in terms of the Revenue Estimating Conference when they built the budget, some of the assumptions were going to be a greater or more significant impact from COVID, and it wasn't as significant as they thought it was going to be. So sales tax were up. So those factors will result in, we'll have probably a little over an $800 million surplus. Now, with that, there's constitutional obligations in terms of paying back some of the UAL, and you have to put 25% in the rainy day fund. So when you from that surplus and you take what the reductions from the things we're required to do, we'll have a little less than about $500 million for surplus dollars that we can use for hopefully projects, infrastructure, coastal. We can put it. There's 6 requirements in addition to infrastructure, roads and bridges, coastal work. So we can hopefully get some of that project money down here and get some things done.
Now, does that all include what you're expecting to come in from the federal government with
that's
their
completely
infrastructure? Right. I mean, that should go kind of on top, overlay, right?
Well, not necessarily overlay, but we want to make sure that we maximize the benefit of utilizing those dollars. Like we're working, so there were ARP dollars that last year we received, American Rescue Plan. We had about $3.2 billion, of which we allocated or budgeted 1.6. So in addition to the surplus, there will be another 1.4, a little over 1.4 billion that we will put to projects and other things that the ARP dollars can be used for. We're starting a new water program. I know there's some projects here in Terrebonne Parish, and talking to Mike with the water district in terms of making some improvements. We have some antiquated pipes, and some of our system needs to be upgraded. So we put $300 million last session. We're going to put at least that, if not more, for clean water projects, sewage projects, improvements, and hopefully we'll put some stuff toward drainage. So there's the surplus dollars, there's the ARP dollars, and then, as you mentioned, the infrastructure dollars will come in. The deal with the infrastructure is we're still waiting for guidance and what it can be spent on. Now, we do know there's going to be a significant portion, roughly 500 plus million, that can be, it doesn't specifically say to the Morganza, to the Gulf, but the way it's worded in our delegation, the way it is, there's not many other options than here in the Morganza to the Gulf. So there will be a lot of, hopefully, some good funding for that.
Yeah, and you know, look, it's paid off. When you talk about some of our levee projects around here, it seems to have paid off for the last couple of storms. Obviously, not the last one from wind damage, but from flood damage, it's really kind of paid off over the last couple of years. Certification for our levees, can that even happen? Where do we have to go to do that?
Well, certification is when you achieve a certain level of flood protection,
Right.
and the 100-year level of protection is ultimately where Morganza will be constructed to. It's going to take a while to get there.
Right.
But, and we would kind of go back to what we were talking about previously in regard to flood insurance, risk rating 2.0 is supposed to take into account those structures and improvements that help attenuate storm surge, reduce storm surge, and hopefully that will factor in and reduce some of the potential increases. And to what degree, we don't really know, but we are hoping and we believe that obviously we have a very, as you mentioned, a good system, and it's improving all the time. The levee district and the parish are doing a great job in working toward completing that system. It won't be certified for a while until it's ultimately complete, but those benefits and improvements that they're working toward every day to make the system a little bit better should factor in ultimately to reducing the, won't be a significant increase in flood insurance.
Right. Yeah. No doubt. I was wondering if we could use some of that money to get it going. Hey, $40 billion is our budget.
Yeah.
That's an incredible number. You talk about rainy days, you talk about other things, infrastructure, but it always seems like hospitals and education are usually the ones at the cutting line when we have one of those years when we're not having a deficit. Anything we can do to where we don't go from just building dorms all over the place to laying people off the next year?
Well, the way the budget is structured, and that's part of what we were trying to achieve in some of the reforms that we try to implement and are continuing to try to implement to improve how we budget for the state. And we have some. We've just had some significant improvement in terms of personal income tax, business income tax that was approved. Right. So that's going to have a significant benefit. But we also need to look at the dedications, the constitutional dedications and statutory dedications, which essentially hamstring our ability to fix the budget if there is a deficit. Now, fortunately, we're in a posture where we'll have a surplus, but it's not going to always be that way, and we need to have the flexibility to be able to maximize the dollars that we have without having to make significant impacts or cuts. So of that budget, $15 billion of that is coming from the federal government for Medicaid, Transportation Trust Fund, other dollars. If you look at what we generate from the state, it's a little right around $10 billion in sales tax and fees and services and things like that that the state generates. So of that, close to $6 billion is statutorily or constitutionally dedicated. So it only leaves about $4 billion of which we can actually use to offset some of those changes. So that's what makes it difficult the way it's structured.
Yeah, no, it always has been. It's always been a problem. We always talk
about
We're working on it,
though. We're trying. We're trying.
Well, I know y'all had the reform, and hopefully that'll make it easier where we don't go. Like I said, I remember right after Katrina, it was like we had all this money, we built all kinds of schools, and then 2 years later we're laying people off. It just didn't seem right, but I know that's one of the reform things y'all been working on for a long time. So right now you're working on a budget. Redistricting will be in February with the session starting in March. So you guys will be doing some stuff besides just going to Mardi Gras up until March.
I don't know if we'll have time for Mardi Gras, but the budget, the executive budget will be presented to the Joint Legislative Committee of the Budget, and that's the House and the Senate committee that receives the budget, on January 25th. And then we will go into special session in February for 3 weeks for redistricting. There'll probably be a week off, and then we start regular session in March. And since this isn't a fiscal session, it's a regular session, it's going to be extended. It goes from March to June. The fiscal sessions, which are somewhat limited, are from April to June, but this is one of the regular sessions.
So what are we going to try and accomplish? What do you see coming down? Which, look, you want to be a long-term thinker, right? In any kind of plans and all that kind of stuff. But when you get a COVID year, you get obviously a hurricane here, we may be back to some kind of restrictions by April and March. So I guess it's hard to plan far out when you're dealing with a pandemic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately we may, but I hope not.
Right. No, I don't think
we
anybody
can,
wants to do
yeah,
that.
I think hopefully we can manage it, and they're hearing more and more. I heard Pfizer came out today with that. Actually, there'll be a medication to treat it. It won't prevent it,
Right.
but you can
Treat it
it'll be
better, right.
feel
Kinda
better.
like-
So, yeah, you want to be long term, and we have been in terms of looking at where we're going to address. The budget issues. Again, we talked about it. Everybody talks about tax reform and all these other things, but when it affects a certain stakeholder, that's when things change. So we're going to continue to work on trying to do some reforms, but we're also utilizing these ARP dollars and these federal dollars to make significant improvements, which will lessen the burden and also try to address some critical infrastructure needs, roads and bridges, flood protection, things that we need, water systems. It's still amazing. A lot of these rural parishes, if you want to see poor, go up to North Louisiana. We have these rural parishes that are still, in some places, they're still drinking and bathing in brown water, and their systems are just antiquated, the pipes, it's just in bad shape in certain areas. And so we're addressing some of those critical infrastructure needs that we need to address across the state. And so we're trying to, taking the money, put it in the most effective and efficient way to make some significant improvements, long-term improvements.
Right, right. And so when you're coming out of a COVID year, you expect things to be robust and get going. Jobs is always a big industry, but now workers might be more of a need than jobs, actually. So that's an interesting time.
Oh, it is. And if you look at the unemployment numbers, they're starting, fortunately, to go down, but that's going to be a whole nother issue because we have suspended the rules in terms of unemployment insurance, of which we're required to pay the state. And when it gets to certain thresholds, it then has certain increases in percentages that both the employer and the employee have to pay without penalty. And so we're at a $200 million level right now. We had to borrow money from the federal government. Before all COVID hit, we had in our unemployment insurance fund over $1 billion. I think it was $1.2 billion. It got so bad last year that we were in a deficit. We had to borrow money from the federal government, of which we have to pay back. But we're now at around 200 and something million, and we're going to try to shore that back up because we have to get to over 450 million to where the percentages, where you don't start imposing some additional penalties on the employers and stuff. And ideally, when you get at 750, then the threshold is high enough that you don't have to put that increase. So we want to try to build it back up to that. And we suspended those penalties because of everything going on, but we can't continue to do that or we won't have enough money to pay unemployment insurance.
We hadn't, coming out of Baton Rouge, we hadn't had any big blowout things, It seems like that we've seen in the past. You anticipate anything going on where maybe it's a federal thing, maybe it's a national type of
Like
project?
a blowout of what? I mean,
Well, I don't know, like abortion or gun control. Everybody's been kind of playing around. Seems like good because we've had a lot of money.
Yeah.
But is there any major bills that are coming out where there's be a major conflict?
I think there's going to be this session because I think there's still a lot of concern with parents and others and employees with the mask mandate. I think there's going to be things in terms of the governor's authority that there's still going to be challenges with that more than likely. I think with the Texas abortion ban and other bills in Mississippi, that may potentially, the Supreme Court may address some of that, but I think ultimately it sounds more and more like it's going to go back to each state. And if that's the case, and depending upon how the Supreme Court rules, there will be probably some legislation in regard to limiting abortions, which needs to happen.
Yeah, we've been on such bipolar spectrums here. It seems like, and in Louisiana is one where it has a Republican House, Senate, and a Democratic governor, which it kind of goes against the grain for a lot of these southern states.
Yeah.
So no, you guys have been actually kind of different in that regard. So yeah, well, I'd rather keep national politics out of it.
Yeah,
right?
and for the most part, as a state, we've been pretty good about trying to the partisan aspect. Unfortunately, there is some tendency toward that, but it's always been that that we may have some partisan issues, but at the end of the day, we're working to the benefit of the state. And I firmly believe that for the most part, the body in both in the House and the Senate are working together to address these critical issues, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, we don't have a governor's election, right? That'll
No,
be
it's
3
gonna
more
be
years, right?
No, 2 more years. Yeah.
2 more years
Yeah.
for him. although the Attorney General would, there's always some games being played there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting coming up in 2 years.
All right, we'll be watching, man. Keep us updated for sure, and we appreciate it, man.
No problem. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your representation. Okay, that's Jerome Zeringue, House Representative of the 52nd District. All right, we'll be back with more Bayou Time right after this.